huge debate that's been going on for a long time about shareholder primacy as well. And there are those out there, including our next guest, Chuka Umunna, who is head of ESG consultancy at Edelman. Good morning to you, sir, who believe that the days of shareholder primacy are at an end. Chuka, that's a bold statement. Good morning to you, by the way. Very nice to see you. A bold statement given history, but it's different this time, is it?
Well, I'm talking to you on the 1-year anniversary to the day that the Business Roundtable, 181 CEOs from the biggest US companies, made a statement saying they were going to put aside the ideal of shareholder primacy and actually focus on the interests of all shareholders, of all stakeholders, not just shareholders. It was quite seismic, actually, to get the people who are making that statement to be doing it. And I think really the two questions are, have they been vindicated in the 12 months that has passed, given all the big events, and how have they performed on that measure? And I think definitely they've been vindicated, because if you look at the performance of, for example, ESG funds, they have outperformed the wider stock market during the COVID-19 sell-off. And of course, the argument was that by focusing on the interests of other stakeholders, it's actually in the long-term interests of shareholders too. And we've also seen, frankly, greater and greater pools of capital in spite of COVID-19 chasing ESG funds, chasing companies with good ESG profiles. So I'd say that actually events have vindicated the argument that you do need to take into account the interests of other stakeholders. And then if you actually look at the performance of those companies in the Business Roundtable on a number of measures, whether it's offering paid sick leave, giving out free PPE, they have performed better and delivered for stakeholders better than the wider stock market.
Chuka, we've heard all this many times before, but I think perhaps the difference is, and this was the focus on your first answer and perhaps my first question as well, is it's a US-led thing as well, not just any US-led initiative as well. We're talking about the likes of Ray Dalio, Jamie Dimon, and Larry Fink as well. That makes a big difference in my head as well. Does it make a big difference globally?
I think so. I think there's a big difference actually coming out of this crisis relative to the last one in 2008-9 when we had the global financial crash. Because I think many corporates, obviously particularly in the financial services sector, very quickly sought to simply return to business as usual. I think that business has learned since then that when you have these big shocks, you cannot just go back to business as usual. And I think that explains why there has been some hesitancy on the part of big multinational companies. If you look here in the UK, there's been hesitancy about taking advantage of the furlough scheme that you've just mentioned, because companies know that if you benefit from financial support from the state in the midst of a big crisis like the one that we're going through, there's going to be a lot more scrutiny of what you do going forward. So if you've taken state support, for example, and then 12 months down the line, you make an enormous compensation payment, package to your CEO, or you do a big share buyback or a big dividend payment, there's going to be a lot of blowback. And what we know from our research, we have the Edelman Trust Barometer, we've been measuring ESG sentiment amongst the public, amongst the customers of these companies for the best part of 2 decades, is that they will punish companies who they don't think do the right thing by all stakeholders. So for example, in our Trust Barometer data that we got over this summer, more than 90% of respondents said they expected companies to put their employees and their suppliers before their own financial interest to some extent to get through the pandemic. And actually, a third of respondents said that they had actively been encouraging successfully friends, acquaintances of theirs not to buy from brands that they perceived hadn't done the right thing through the pandemic.
Interestingly, Chuka, Steve mentioned the names of leading business people. Just focusing on governments, do you think public policy has been strong enough in this area through recent years? It seems that the focus at the moment is very much to come out of the pandemic, to get the economy working again and to re-employ those who are losing their jobs. Build it back better is a slogan that's being tossed around, but you're not hearing a whole lot in terms of putting real pounds or dollars back to work to reinforce that message.
Well, I don't think it's sustainable for governments to continue spending in the way that they have. However, if they withdraw the support too precipitously, then we would potentially see a jobless recovery. And I mean, I think you just announced in your headline package there, Pizza Express, one of our best known eating out places here in the UK, shedding 1,000 jobs. Another well-known British brand, Marks and Spencer's, announced yesterday that they were losing more than 7,000 jobs. So I think really the big question for policymakers on the political side is, how do you build back better or recover, but with jobs? Because it's possible that we might get a recovery of sorts, maybe even a V-shaped recovery. I'm skeptical about that, but without actually delivering more jobs when so many have been lost. I tell you what, though, and in many respects, some would say our systems, our government systems haven't been working very well. I think the central bankers have done quite well in being coordinated in the action that they have taken over the last few months. I think governments less so. But I think part of the problem with a global pandemic like this is it is so exceptional. The set of skills that policy makers on the political side require to make it, to win elections, to govern in normal times are very different to what you need now, because the decisions that they're making, let's be honest here, are not particularly ideological. Everybody in the UK, for example, supports the furlough scheme. There is no alternative but to have had the furlough scheme over the last few months. So it's not really an ideological issue. What you're talking about, whether it's doing test and trace, sorting out the economy, getting it moving again, right now, a lot of this is very logistical, practical stuff. And most of our politicians, wherever it may be, are not trained to do those things, because they're not required to do those things in normal times so much. And I think that's what we're really suffering from at the moment. And I'm loath to criticise, because I think they're dealing with an incredibly difficult situation, and extraordinary times call for extraordinary people. And most politicians are not extraordinary. They're everyday people trying to do the best thing for the countries that they serve and they represent. But they're not necessarily furnished with the skills to do this exceptional work. And we're expecting them to do exceptional things that maybe they just can't do at the moment.